In the quiet ribs of the Ironwood range, where dawn mist still clung to the pines like a ghost refusing to leave, Elias Rourke opened his cabin door, expecting only rain and silence. Instead, a trembling German shepherd pup stood in the cold mud, shivering so violently it seemed ready to collapse. But the dog didn't step forward. It backed away, whining, pleading, begging Elias to follow into the fog-drowned forest. That was when he noticed the scrap caught beneath its collar, a torn, blood-streaked strip of yellow canvas, the same rugged fabric worn by forestry workers, and by the young woman lying somewhere out there in the storm. What started as a quiet morning would soon drag Elias into a night of broken promises, lost children, and a second chance he never expected. Before we begin, please like, comment, and subscribe to follow this incredible journey of courage, faith, and survival. A cold autumn rain drifted across the Ironwood range, wrapping the old mountain cabins in a curtain of silver mist. Inside one of them, Elias Rourke crouched beside a dented oil heater, tightening a stubborn valve with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who had lived alone for far too long. At 58, Elias had the build of someone cut from weathered oak, broad shoulders that had once carried rescue gear across ravines, a square jaw half hidden under a short, iron-gray beard, and deep lines carved by mountain wind and old grief. His eyes, pale blue and sharp as glacial runoff, belonged to a man who had learned to live with silence and did not trust easily. Years ago, during his service as an Air Force pararescue specialist, he had watched one failed operation cost the life of a young pilot he had promised to pull out alive. That memory had hardened him, and since then the mountains had been both his exile and his shelter. As he adjusted the heater's rusted pipe, a faint sound rose above the patter of rain, a soft, repetitive scratching, almost too gentle to be real. Elias froze. No one visited this ridge. Travelers avoided Ironwood once the fog settled. The closest road was 5 miles of winding gravel below. His heartbeat thumped cautiously, the way it always had before breaching a downed aircraft. He stood, wiped grease onto his flannel sleeve, and approached the door. The scratching came again, quicker now, urgent but light. When Elias unlatched the door and pulled it open, a gust of wet wind slapped his face and pushed a strand of gray hair across his brow. Right at his boots crouched a puppy, soaked to the bone. It was a German shepherd, not the classic black and tan, but a rare, dark sable with a streak of rust along its spine, the coat clinging to its ribs from the rain. The puppy looked about 6 months old, large-pawed but underweight, its ears half drooped from cold. Its eyes, wide, amber, unsettled, held a depth of awareness that made Elias's pulse tighten. This was no stray abandoned on the ridge. The puppy trembled violently, but when Elias extended a hand, it didn't move closer. Instead, it stepped backward, whining through chattering teeth. Not fear, insistence. "Easy, little one," Elias muttered, his voice gravelly from disuse. He crouched, but the puppy darted sideways and tugged sharply at the hem of his work pants. Elias stiffened. Dogs didn't behave like that unless they wanted something, or unless they were trying to lead someone. A pararescueman's instinct flickered awake inside him. He narrowed his eyes and gently captured the puppy's collar. It was simple leather, worn soft with age, but something was wedged beneath the metal buckle. Elias turned it toward the dim cabin light. A small strip of fabric clung there, cocky yellow, frayed at the edges, streaked with mud and blood. It was the kind of fabric used for durable work jackets worn by forestry crews and ranch hands. Whatever had ripped it free had done so violently. Elias felt his throat tighten, not with fear, but with the heavy weight of responsibility, a sensation he had spent years trying to outrun. He rubbed the fabric between his rough fingers. The blood was still tacky. Recent, too recent. As thunder rumbled over the ridge, he lifted his gaze toward the fog-drenched slope beyond the cabin. The puppy followed his line of sight, then looked back at him, whining louder, pacing in restless half-circles, before tugging at his pants again. A call for help, wordless, desperate, unmistakable. Elias's chest tightened. He hated this feeling, the moment a quiet night turned into a mission, the moment he was no longer allowed to be a man hiding from his past, but had to be what he once was, someone who did not look away. The puppy barked once, sharp and pleading, then stepped toward the narrow trail that wound down into the valley, where the mist thickened into an opaque wall. Elias stood motionless for several seconds, the rain tapping against his shoulders. He knew the valley well. Loose shale, sudden drop-offs, ground softened by days of rain. A wounded person wouldn't last long down there, not in this cold, not in this fog. And this puppy, it had run through it alone. "Someone's out there," Elias murmured, gripping the fabric scrap. The wind blew a cold sheet of rain across the porch, and the puppy flinched, but didn't retreat. It simply looked at him, trembling yet resolute. Something in that gaze, fear mixed with determination, pulled a memory from Elias's past. The young pilot's eyes, moments before he had sworn he would come back for him, a promise he couldn't keep. Elias exhaled slowly, a breath that carried years of regret. "All right," he muttered, turning back into the cabin. "I hear you." He grabbed his coat, flashlight, and the small rescue kit he never fully unpacked. When he stepped back out, the puppy was waiting at the top of the steps, rain dripping from its muzzle. "Show me," Elias said. The German shepherd puppy spun toward the mist and limped ahead, and Elias followed it down the trail into the cold, shifting haze, aware that every step pulled him toward a stranger in need, and toward the part of himself he thought he had buried for good. The fog thickened as Elias followed the narrow trail downward, each step sinking into damp earth softened by the evening rain. Marlin trotted ahead in short, anxious bursts, his sable coat slicked flat against his ribs, his paws slipping in the mud, but never stopping. Elias kept the beam of his flashlight steady, though his pulse grew louder with every sign the mountain revealed. A deep groove in the soil, a torn clump of moss, a smear of reddish-brown across a slick rock, all of it forming a silent trail of desperation. He moved with the practiced caution of a retired para-rescueman, steady breathing, weight low, feet testing the ground before committing. The valley exhaled cold mist around him, swallowing sounds and shapes, until even Marlin's small form seemed like a trembling shadow against the dripping ferns. The dog looked back frequently, amber eyes bright with purpose, and every time Elias met that gaze, he felt the old gears within him turn, the instincts he had tried to bury rising like smoke. They reached a break in the tree line where the land abruptly dipped toward a fractured stone outcrop. The rain hit the exposed rock in silver pinpricks. Elias swept the flashlight along the edge, and his jaw tightened. Fresh earth had been ripped from the slope. The path of something heavy, something rolling, was carved into the mud and through the broken shrubs below. He lay flat against the wet ground and angled the light downward. 30 feet below, caught between thorny brush and roots, was an overturned all-terrain ATV. Its metal frame twisted, tires still faintly spinning as rain collected into its wheel wells. Steam rose from the engine, shifting into the fog like a ghostly breath. Marlin barked once, sharp, frightened, and scrambled along a narrow goat trail leading downward. Elias followed, descending on hands and boots, gripping roots, careful not to send loose stones tumbling. Halfway down, he caught the metallic scent of fuel and blood, mixing with the petrichor-soaked air. When they reached the wreck, Marlin immediately pushed his nose against a small opening in the crumpled chassis and whimpered. Elias crouched beside him and aimed the beam inside. A woman lay slumped over the bent handlebars, her torso twisted unnaturally. She looked young, early 20s, with a long, angular face and pale skin that had gone almost ash-gray in the cold. Her hair, a deep chestnut brown, hung in wet strands across her cheeks. She was slim, almost fragile, but her forearms showed the wiry muscle tone of someone used to physical labor, likely ranch work or forestry. A small gold ring glinted on her right ear, simple and unadorned, suggesting someone practical, someone unaccustomed to vanity. Her chest rose and fell in sharp, irregular shudders. A faint wheeze escaped her lips. One leg was trapped under the crushed steel frame of the ATV. Her hands were scraped and muddy as if she had tried to brace herself during the fall. Elias leaned. Closer. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The woman's eyelids fluttered. Her eyes, hazel with flecks of green, opened in a dazed panic. When she finally focused on him, confusion flickered to recognition of danger. Her breath hitched. "Don't move," Elias said gently. "You're injured. I'm here to help." But she didn't look at him. She suddenly jerked her gaze past his shoulder toward the dark forest above the ravine. Her pupils widened with fear, her lips parted. Barely a whisper escaped. "Arlo." Elias leaned closer, his ear almost touching her trembling mouth. "Arlo, my little brother." Her voice cracked, raw with terror. "He ran into the woods." She tried to lift her arm, but it dropped limply against the twisted metal. "Please, he's 7. He got scared." The weight of her words settled into Elias's bones. A child, alone, in the fog, at night, and running blindly after surviving a crash. "Easy," Elias murmured. "We'll find him, but I need to get you free first." He set down his flashlight and inspected the crushed frame. It had pinned her leg high against the chassis, compressing tissue and cutting circulation. If he freed her wrong, she could bleed out fast. Rainwater dripped through the vehicle's interior, tapping against metal like a threatening clock. Elias whispered, "Marlin, back." The puppy obeyed with surprising precision for his age, stepping away but keeping his eyes locked on the woman. Elias slid both hands under the bent bar and pushed. The metal groaned, his shoulders strained, the old injury in his back flaring with white-hot pain. The bar didn't budge. Elias cursed under his breath. He repositioned, pressing his knee into the muddy earth to gain leverage. This time the frame lifted, just enough for him to slide an arm underneath, brace it against a branch, and pull her leg free. She screamed, a thin, broken sound, but Elias caught her before she slumped entirely. Her leg was swollen badly, twisted at an angle that made his stomach clench. "Stay with me," he urged. Her breath grew shallow. "Find Arlo, promise." Marlin pressed against Elias's hip, whining as the woman's eyes fluttered. For a moment, Elias was back in a desert 2 decades earlier, holding a dying young pilot who had whispered a similar plea. A plea he had failed to fulfill. His throat tightened. "I'm not leaving him," Elias said, the oath burning in his voice. "But I won't leave you either." She managed a faint, broken smile, a look of complete trust given to a stranger in the rain. Then her head slumped forward. She was still breathing, but barely. Elias examined her quickly, hypothermia starting, leg fracture, signs of internal damage. Moving her far would risk killing her. Staying meant losing precious minutes to find the boy. The fog expanded like a living thing, swallowing the upper ridge. Somewhere in that shifting gray, a 7-year-old with no light, no warmth, and no sense of direction was trying to survive the night. Elias looked at Marlin. The puppy lifted his head, ears pricking, nose twitching fiercely toward the tree line. He had found her once. He could find the boy. "Marlin," Elias said quietly. "Track." The dog turned, took 2 steps toward the forest, then looked back, waiting for confirmation. Elias nodded. In seconds, Marlin bounded into the fog, small, determined, and guided by something older than fear. Elias adjusted his raincoat around the unconscious woman, making sure her breathing stayed steady. Then he grabbed his flashlight and rescue kit. "Hold on," he murmured to her. "I'll bring him back." And without looking back again, he ran into the shifting, suffocating fog, toward a child's faint hope of survival, and toward the ghosts he had spent half a lifetime trying to outrun. The wind sharpened as Elias left the wreck behind, rain slicing diagonally across the slope like cold wires. The fog clung low to the ground, thick enough to blur the outlines of trees into pale, swaying ghosts. Marlin darted ahead with renewed urgency. his small body weaving through clusters of wet ferns, nose pressed low, tail rigid like an arrow. Elias followed close behind, the weight of responsibility tightening across his shoulders the way his old rescue harness once had. He kept one ear tuned to the storm and the other to the possibility of a child's whimper, any thin thread of sound. But the Ironwood range had a way of swallowing noise. His breath steamed heavily in the chill air as he forced his legs to move faster, despite the terrain fighting him back. His boots sank into patches of mud, and once he slipped and scraped his palm on a jagged root. He hissed under his breath, but didn't slow. He thought of Lisa, barely conscious, clinging to him with desperate fingers as she whispered her brother's name. There had been terror in her hazel eyes, but also conviction, trust. She had looked at him the same way that young pilot had looked at him decades earlier, right before Elias failed to pull him out of the burning cockpit. That memory had lived inside Elias ever since, a scar no mirror could show. Tonight felt like a chance to fight the ghost he carried. Marlin suddenly stopped. His ears perked forward and he let out a staccato bark, sharp, directional. Elias adjusted his flashlight and crouched beside him. The beam revealed small footprints, half filled with rainwater, leading into a denser part of the forest, where the wind tunneled through the branches like a cracked whistle. The tracks were uneven, some deep, some shallow, showing panic, a child stumbling blind. Elias swallowed the tightness in his throat. "Good boy," he whispered. But the puppy's tail flicked, but didn't wag. Marlin's body was taut with the seriousness of the task, his instincts far older than his age. They followed the winding trail deeper into the woods. The storm grew harsher, the air carrying leaves in spiraling gusts that rattled like bones. Elias scanned constantly, sweeping light beneath fallen logs, between clusters of brambles and along the base of boulders. This was how frightened children behaved. They hid inside small spaces where the world felt smaller, safer. A faint movement caught his eye, a vibration in the low brush near a toppled ironwood tree, its roots twisted upward like skeletal hands. Marlin bolted toward the shape, nose pressed against the hollow beneath the trunk. He whined, pawing frantically. Elias knelt, pushing branches aside. The beam of his flashlight landed on a young boy curled into a tight ball inside a shallow rock alcove beneath the tree's massive root. Arlo Calder. He was small for 7, with a narrow face and freckles lost beneath dirt and rain. His hair, light brown, almost blonde in the wet, clung to his forehead. His lips had turned a frightening shade of blue, and his eyes were barely open, only thin slits revealing glassy fear. His soaked shirt clung to his ribs. His chest rose in shallow, stuttering breaths, the kind that told Elias time had nearly run out. The child was on the precipice of hypothermia, where shivering stopped not from comfort, but because the body surrendered. Elias felt his heart jolt painfully. "Hey, kid." "Arlo, I'm Elias. Your sister sent me." His voice softened, melting into a tone he hadn't used since he had once comforted new recruits trembling before their first jump. The boy didn't respond, but his eyes flickered at the sound of his sister's mention, a tiny spark reaching for hope. Marlin pushed into the hollow and pressed his small, warm body against Arlo's chest, curling around him, whining as if urging him to stay alive. Elias removed his own outer jacket, thick canvas lined for cold mountain nights, and wrapped it around the boy, tucking it carefully around his limbs. He placed both hands on Arlo's icy cheeks, rubbing gently to restore circulation. The rain continued to lash through the trees, and thunder rolled somewhere distant, warning of heavier downpour. Time was shrinking. Elias assessed the surroundings. Moving the child now would expose him to stronger winds and further temperature loss. The ridge above was slick, unstable, and the fog distorted distance. If they slipped or got lost, Arlo might not survive the transit. They needed shelter, now. He glanced at the tree's fallen trunk. Its roots had formed a natural alcove, that shielded from some of the rain. Combined with a makeshift barrier, it could hold. Elias tore open his pack and removed a heavy-duty rain poncho. With quick, practiced movements, he hooked its corners to roots and stones, angling it into a small lean-to that caught the wind and funneled it away. The air temperature inside rose slightly, just enough. He crawled in beside Arlo, bracing the poncho with his back and shoulders. Marlin curled tighter around the boy, burying his muzzle beneath Elias's coat, as if insulating Arlo with every ounce of heat he possessed. Elias pressed the child against his chest, one hand behind Arlo's head, the other gripping his tiny hands to keep them warm. The wind outside hissed and roared, shaking the poncho violently, but his body held firm. "Stay with me, Arlo," Elias whispered. "I've got you. Your sister's waiting. You hear me? She needs you." The boy stirred faintly, just a twitch, but enough for Elias's heart to ease by an inch. Minutes bled into hours, though the storm made time impossible to track. Elias's muscles burned, his back ached sharply, but he didn't shift. He kept his warmth pressed into the boy's fragile frame. Marlin did the same, vibrating softly with tiny shivers as he fought to keep generating heat. Through the darkness, Elias felt a strange familiarity, this posture, this responsibility, this suspended moment between death and rescue. Only this time the universe was giving him another chance at what he'd once failed to do. He held Arlo tighter, whispering promises he wasn't sure the boy could hear. Eventually, the faintest change occurred. The boy's breathing, once ragged and erratic, evened into a slow, fragile rhythm. His fingers twitched around Elias's thumb. His head sagged into Elias's chest, not in collapse, but in surrender to warmth. It wasn't victory, but it was life. Elias inhaled the damp air deeply, steadying himself. The storm raged on, but inside the tiny lean-to, 3 living creatures pressed together. An old soldier, a frightened child, and a brave puppy held the line against the cold world outside. They would survive the night, and with dawn they would carry Arlo back to his sister. That promise was enough to keep Elias awake, unblinking, guarding them, until the wind softened. Dawn crept slowly across the Ironwood range, its pale light filtering through thinning fog like a weary promise. Elias had spent the entire night half awake beneath the makeshift shelter, one arm bracing the poncho overhead, the other wrapped around Arlo's fragile body. Marlin had slept in fitful bursts, his small frame pressed firmly against the boy's chest, as though any distance between them would invite death back into the circle of warmth they had carved from the storm. The wind finally softened near morning. Elias felt it before he saw it, the easing of pressure against his back, the faint shift in air that signaled a gentler sky. He blinked stiffly, his joints aching from hours of immobility. He checked Arlo first. The boy's breathing had steadied through the night, though each inhale was still thin and cautious. His cheeks held the slightest hint of returning color. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was hope. Marlin lifted his head, ears pricking as distant sounds drifted through the forest. Faint rumbling engines, the snap of branches under calculated boots, the static crackle of radio chatter. Search teams. Elias let out a shaky breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He gently eased the poncho aside and guided Arlo up, supporting him with one arm. The boy stirred weakly, his eyes opening to slivers. "Your sister," Elias whispered. "We're going to her now." Arlo's lips trembled, but he nodded once, small, exhausted, brave. Elias carried him carefully through the damp brush, Marlin staying glued to his heels. The storm had washed much of the forest clean, leaving the world smelling like wet earth and pine sap. The path was slow, deliberate. Any sudden movement might shock the boy's fragile system. It took nearly 15 minutes to climb back toward the ravine where the crash lay. As they approached, Elias saw the rescue crew gathered around the overturned ATV. Several figures in bright rain gear moved with practiced precision. One of them, a paramedic with a compact frame, sandy blonde hair, and a stern, focused expression, noticed Elias first. He looked about 30, with square glasses fogged by humidity. His name badge read H. Porter. His movements were crisp, efficient, suggesting a man who handled crisis by locking emotion behind professionalism. Porter hurried toward them. "Sir, are you—" His voice broke when he saw Arlo limp against Elias's shoulder. "We've been searching for that boy all night." Elias nodded once, his voice hoarse. "He's alive. Cold, but alive." Porter immediately signaled the others. "Blankets, heat packs, move." The team sprang into motion. 2 rescuers jogged over carrying medical gear and a stretcher. Marlin, sensing the sudden surge of strangers, bristled and stepped between Arlo and the approaching men. Porter halted, raising both hands calmly. "Easy, buddy. We're here to help." But Marlin's growl deepened, sharp and protective. The rescuers exchanged uncertain glances. Elias shifted Arlo carefully, whispering to Marlin, "It's all right, I'm here." The puppy hesitated, leaning into Elias's leg, torn between instinct and trust. Porter stepped closer, and his expression shifted the moment he saw the stretcher near the ATV. Lisa Calder lay there, covered up to the chest with an emergency blanket, unmoving. Her features, once tense with fear and determination, had softened into a peaceful stillness that felt unnatural. Her chestnut hair spread across the blanket like fallen leaves. Her lips were pale. Elias stopped breathing. The world dimmed around him. A medic approached him, an older woman with a lined face, sharp cheekbones, and hair pulled into a tight gray bun. She had the steady demeanor of someone who had seen too many endings to soften at the sight of another. Her voice was gentle but firm. "She woke for a moment," the medic said. "Asked for you." Elias felt the words like a cold blade against his ribs. What did she say? The medic held his gaze, steady, solemn. She said, "Make sure he's safe. Don't let him be lost like I was." Then she was gone. Elias bowed his head, grief catching in his throat like grit. He had held onto a thread of impossible hope that she might still survive. But life in the mountains was rarely merciful. Marlin pressed close against Elias's leg, sensing the shift in emotion, whining softly. Arlo stirred weakly in Elias's arms, unaware of the finality only a few yards away. Porter stepped forward again. "Sir, we need to take the boy. He's hypothermic and dehydrated." As the rescuers set down the stretcher beside Elias, one of them, a tall man with a thick brown beard and a heavy jaw, reached out for Arlo. His grip was firm, practical, but he moved too quickly. Marlin exploded into action. The puppy lunged forward, barking ferociously, placing himself directly between Arlo and the rescuers. His fur bristled, teeth bared, an animal far beyond his small size. Arlo jolted awake, panic flaring across his face. He clung to Elias with renewed terror. Elias stepped forward, his voice thundering over the forest. "Stop!" The entire rescue team froze. Elias's stare was sharp enough to carve stone. "The dog stays with the boy," he said, his voice low but absolute, echoing through the ravine like a command he hadn't spoken in years. "You separate them. You go through me." The bearded rescuer hesitated, taken aback. Porter raised a calm hand, diffusing the tension. "Everyone hold!" He studied the trembling puppy, then looked at Arlo, who was gripping Marlin's scruff with desperate fingers. Porter exhaled softly. "They're bonded," he said. "The dog rides with the boy." The team murmured, some doubtful, others relieved. Elias felt a flicker of gratitude toward the paramedic. Porter nodded to the stretcher. "Let's move." They wrapped Arlo in thermal blankets, keeping Marlin tucked right beside him, the puppy refusing to leave, even for a second. Elias walked beside the stretcher all the way up the ravine, hands ready to steady it whenever the slope shifted. At the ridge, Sheriff Nolan Wade, an older man with smoke-gray hair, a black raincoat, and deeply set eyes that held both authority and quiet empathy met them with a grim expression. Elias had known men like him before, calm in disaster, fierce when necessary, carrying the silent fatigue of years in law enforcement. Wade took one look at Arlo clinging to Marlin and nodded solemnly. "Let the dog stay. He's family now." He turned to Elias. "And until social services gets involved, the kid stays with you under emergency custody. You brought him out of that forest. That makes you responsible until they sort the rest." Elias didn't hesitate. "I'll take him." Wade gripped his shoulder, a rare gesture from a man who likely didn't offer such comfort often. "Good, he'll need you." Marlin nudged Elias's hand, and Arlo, wrapped in blankets, drifted into an exhausted sleep. Elias looked at them both, and the weight of Lisa's final plea settled deep into his chest. He would honor it, no matter what it cost him. The Ironwood forest had taken much that night, but it had also given him a purpose he thought he'd lost forever. Spring arrived softly in the Ironwood range, not with the sudden burst of warmth the lowlands knew, but with slow, careful shifts, patches of green pushing through old frost, birds returning in tentative pairs, streams whispering again where winter had once sealed their voices. For Elias Rourke, it marked the first season in years that didn't feel like another burden to endure. He stood outside his cabin early that morning, his breath stirring in the mild chill, listening to the rhythmic tapping inside as Arlo practiced reading aloud. The boy's voice, still small but stronger than it had once been, carried through the half-open window like a soft promise. Arlo had changed. He had been a ghost when Elias first brought him home, pale, silent, shadow-eyed. But months of care, routine, and the unwavering presence of Marlin had begun to stitch the broken parts of him back together. Now, at 7 years old, Arlo had a mess of dark curls that always fell over his forehead, olive-toned skin warmed by time outdoors, and deep-set hazel eyes that flickered between quiet intelligence and lingering vulnerability. He was gentle, cautious in new situations, and still prone to freezing when startled by loud sounds, but he was learning to breathe, to laugh, to trust that the world wasn't waiting to hurt him again. Marlin, once a scrawny, rain-soaked puppy, had grown into a powerful young German shepherd with dense black and rust fur, a proud stance, and a confidence that radiated through every movement. At about 1 year old, he had the energy of a comet and the discipline of a guardian forged by circumstance. His loyalty to Arlo ran deeper than instinct. It was something almost spiritual, a bond written into the earth of Ironwood itself. Inside the cabin, Arlo finished a full paragraph without stumbling, and Elias couldn't help smiling, a rare expression that softened the deep creases of his face and made him look younger than 58. His beard, now more silver than gray, twitched with pride as he stepped inside. "Good work, kid," Elias said, voice low but warm. Arlo looked up, cheeks flushing with shy pride. I did it without stopping." "You did," Elias confirmed, "and your pacing's smoother." Marlin trotted over, nudging Arlo's knee with his muzzle, as if demanding recognition for his moral support. The boy giggled, a sound no one in Ironwood had heard from him during the first weeks. Elias ruffled the dog's head. "Yeah, I know. Couldn't have done it without you, partner." The dog's tail swept the floor. Later that afternoon, they drove down the mountain into town. Elias rarely visited Ironwood's county seat. Too many people, too many memories he didn't want to stir, but today required it. Today was the court hearing, the day the state would decide whether Arlo Calder remained under emergency custody or whether he would truly, legally, become Elias's son. The courthouse stood at the edge of town, a sturdy brick building softened by spring vines curling along its columns. People bustled in and out, dressed in work gear, suits, or denim, Ironwood folk who knew hardship, who didn't flinch at storms or long nights. At the front steps waited Judge Rowan Halden, a man in his early 60s with a kind, thoughtful face, framed by neatly kept salt and pepper hair. Halden was tall and slightly stooped from years behind a courtroom desk. His brown eyes were patient, observant, touched by the softness of someone who had seen families torn apart and put back together again. Rumor had it he lost his own daughter years ago in a hiking accident, a grief that never left him but made him fiercely protective of vulnerable children. His demeanor was calm, composed, and quietly empathetic, qualities that made him well respected in these mountains. He greeted Elias with a nod before glancing at Arlo, who clung lightly to Marlin's harness. "You ready, young man?" Halden asked gently. Arlo hesitated, then nodded. Inside the courtroom, sunlight seeped through high windows and cast warm beams across the wooden benches. A few local officials attended, including Sheriff Nolan Wade, who offered a reassuring nod from the back row. The paperwork was long, the questions numerous, but Elias answered each with steady clarity: where Arlo slept, what he ate, how he was healing, how the dog fit into the home, whether Elias understood the responsibility he was accepting. When the final form was stamped, Halden leaned forward, folding his hands. "Mr. Rourke," he said, "by the authority of Ironwood County and the state of Montana, you are now the legal guardian and adoptive father of Arlo Calder." Arlo froze. The words hung in the air like a miracle. Marlin barked once, sharp, proud, triumphant. Elias exhaled slowly, as though releasing the last breath of his former life. Then he knelt beside Arlo, placing a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're mine now," he said softly, "if you want that." Arlo didn't answer with words. He simply wrapped his arms around Elias's neck, face buried against the man's shoulder. A wet patch of tears spread across Elias's shirt, but the old soldier didn't mind. He lifted his boy with a quiet strength he'd thought he no longer possessed. Afterward, they drove up the mountain not to celebrate, but to honor. The path to Lisa Calder's burial spot was lined with young wildflowers, the first of the season. Arlo carried a smooth river stone in his hand, the kind he liked to collect on their walks. When they reached the modest grave shaded by quivering aspen leaves, Elias stepped back, letting Arlo approach alone. The boy knelt, placing the stone at the head of the marker. Marlin sat beside him, tail curled neatly, head bowed. Arlo whispered, voice steady but soft, "You don't have to worry anymore. I'm not lost. I have a family now." Elias moved beside him, laying a hand on his shoulder. "We're a pack. Ironwood is your home, as long as you want it to be." Marlin gave a low, gentle bark, the sound echoing like a vow through the quiet grove. The wind carried petals across the ground, brushing past the three of them, man, boy, and dog, bound by grief, forged by survival, and now, finally, held by love. A new spring had come to Ironwood, and with it, a new beginning they were ready to claim. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels in shining robes. Sometimes they come in the shape of a frightened boy, a stubborn puppy, and a quiet man who thought his heart had stopped beating long ago. What happened in Ironwood wasn't just survival, it was grace. It was the gentle hand of God moving through rain, fog, and heartbreak, guiding a lost child to warmth, guiding a broken man back to purpose, and guiding a loyal dog to become the bridge between two souls who needed each other more than they ever knew. In our own lives, we often feel like we're wandering through our own storms, moments when the road is unclear, when hope feels far away, when loss seems bigger than we can carry. But stories like Elias, Arlo, and Marlin remind us of something timeless. God sends help in many forms, sometimes through people, sometimes through animals, sometimes through the strength He plants quietly in our hearts when we need it most. And maybe, just maybe, He places certain souls in our path at the exact moment we're ready to be changed by them. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that miracles still walk among us. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and how God has sent a protector, a friend, or a miracle into your own life. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story of hope, loyalty, and the quiet ways God still works in this world. May the Lord bless you, protect you, and guide your steps, just as he guided a child, a soldier, and a faithful dog through the forests of Ironwood. God bless you and your family.